Good evening and welcome to Italian Impact Weekly Podcast. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini, and once again, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank all of my listeners, and especially my listeners from all over the world. Again, as I've stated multiple times, and I don't say this lightly, I'm very humbled by the fact that I have probably, 30 different countries with people downloading and listening to this show. So I want to thank you again from all over the world. And I hope you continue to enjoy the show. Today I have a very special guest because this is kind of a theme that if you've been listening to the show, you've heard me talk about the importance of getting the youth involved, not just, in the Italian cultural movement, but in all kinds of movements and programs, and to, encourage the next generation to come up to maybe, whether it's add value, find value, change the direction, but to get involved in what I'll call social organizations. So I have a wonderful guest today. His name is Andrew Speicher. He is the president and founder of La Prossima, and it's a group, if I'm not mistaken, Andrew, you are in Columbus, Ohio.
Yes, we are. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
No problem. Glad you took time out of your schedule to come join me because I know you're pretty busy. Andrew, I want to ask, and I got to ask this, I would be remiss if I didn't just ask you point blank. Where's your family from?
My family, so I grew up here in Columbus, Ohio, but my roots trace back to Abruzzo, like
there
most Columbus Italians. So
that's where I was going, buddy.
Somewhere back in the line.
All right, fantastic. You're not a first-generation Italian, obviously. When did your family originally come over here? And I'm going somewhere. By the way, this line of questioning is almost detective in nature, but it all builds towards something. So how long ago did your family come here?
Yeah, so my family mostly came here in the early to mid 1900s, so most of them coming over in the 20s and 30s.
Now here's where I'm going with that. So you're a perfect example of someone that's, at least 3 generations removed from the folks that immigrated here. But yet there is something in you that said, you know what, I still want to continue to promote and celebrate the culture. And we're going to talk about La Prossima in a second here. What is it that has obviously survived multiple generations, thinking how far removed you were from the actual, family members that immigrated here? What is it that has survived that keeps pushing you to continue to promote the culture?
Yeah, so I think there are many factors that keep me engaged in Italian culture and wanting to promote it, especially among my peers. But I think a main point I want to talk about is just belonging, and the fact that I think in the human race, we all kind of search for belonging in a sense. And I think the first way to do it is to really identify with your culture and, what came before you. And so for me, it's about identifying with other people who kind of share similar values as me, people who were raised similar to me. And, the Italian culture is so beautiful. And so for me, I think belonging is number one. I've been lucky enough to be able to go to the towns where both my mother and my father's side of the family comes from. And I can tell you it's very special getting to go there and to see where your family came from and to walk the fields that they worked in. And I think it just gives you a sense of pride and definitely a sense of self-identity. So for me, I think my passion for Italian culture was really heightened when I was able to go over there and see where my people came from.
And you said something very, very key. You said sense of belonging, and I think that is it. If people want to say, well, why do you want to promote the culture? Why do you want to live in the past? Why do you care about history? Because I've said this multiple times, and multiple guests have said this. If you don't know where you're from, you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you don't know, what you're meant to be and where you're meant to go. And I think we all have a purpose. And I think our past ties us to our future, to our purpose. But you said it. It's that sense of belonging by hanging on and holding on to that culture and continuing to learn about it. And you said you made the trips to Abruzzo. I'm going to ask you in a second where you came from. But, you really nailed something that I think a lot of people are missing. And that is by understanding your historical, relevance of your culture, going back in time, go back 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. What did those people do? Who were they? Why did they leave Italy? Understanding all of this, then you go, wow, that's why I'm here. And then I can do something better. Now, let's go to Abruzzo, because you said you made the trip. How many times have you been there, and where's your family from?
So I think I've been there maybe about 3 or 4 times now. My father's side of the family is from a town called Paderano Sulgizio, which is close to Sulmona, if you're familiar with that area of Abruzzo. They're famous for the confetti, the candied almonds, and the saffron, and it's a wonderful place. But Paderano Sulgizio is a little town in the mountains and very picturesque. But most people in Columbus either come from that town or a town next to it called Intro d'Acqua, if you've ever heard of it. So that's my dad's side of the family, and then my mother's side of the family is from a town called Giulianova, which is right on the Adriatic, still in Abruzzo. So,
and we were talking about Abruzzo, and I think a lot of people don't know that is everything from mountains and skiing to beaches. Were you surprised when you went there and saw that?
Yes, I mean, it's so beautiful, and I remember just driving on the Autostrada and going through my dad's town and just being in awe the entire time of how amazing the mountains are. I mean, it's right in the Apennine Mountains, and it's nothing like you've seen before, especially coming from the Midwest. I just was very shocked.
You covered the. By the way, I think we were talking. Actually, I lived over in Dayton for a while, and obviously, I've been through the Midwest. Now, when you get to the Colorados, it's very different. But when you're in the Midwest, it is flat. And when you go to Abruzzo and you're in those windy mountain roads, you're like, oh my God! Is that where you were thinking the same thing?
100%. Like I said, I was in awe. I'm like, this is insane, and no one talks about it. I think Abruzzo is definitely a hidden gem of Italy.
Right. Well, I tell you what's funny you say that, because I think a lot of people, especially in Pittsburgh area, I know you were from Columbus, but over in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of people that came from Abruzzo, and particularly an area called Adelaida, especially where I'm from. And so they'll talk about those areas, and there were a lot of people that said, well, they came from that area and settled in Pittsburgh because the rolling hills of Pittsburgh sort of reminded them, of their hometown. But, the Four Seasons, Italy's also very hit or miss on weather. It's when you go up north, you get 4 seasons, really cold, wintry winters. When you go south, in Sicily, you're not seeing snowfall in the average places in Sicily. I think maybe in the mountains you might get something, but Abruzzo is one of those. Depends where you're from, what your view is, because when you're in the mountains, you get this green, lush, beautiful, hot summers and really cold winters with a lot of snow. And like we said, before you know it, you're down on the beach.
Yeah, I know. It's a wonderful dichotomy for sure.
Now let's talk a little bit about when was the first year you went there?
I went in 2021.
Just any particular reason?
So I really tapped into my roots that year. To go a little bit more on like a personal note, I'm actually adopted. And so for me, I was graduating high school. I was applying for scholarships for college. And my adopted parents had always told me that my birth family was Italian. And I never knew any details of that. But, later along, as I'm applying for these scholarships, I heard of the Columbus Italian Club scholarship, and it's something I really wanted to apply for. And I've always been a genealogy nerd, so I decided to ask my parents more questions, see if they could help me out with anything. And luckily, they were able to get in contact with my biological family again. And so that was like the starting point. I've reconnected with them since, and we're very, very close. And it's, truly like a beautiful story, the way that it's turned out. And that is when I decided I want to go and I want to experience this for myself and go to a place where my family came from. And so, tapping into the Italian roots on its own was already kind of a journey of self-identity, but, adding in the adoption part of it too made it, I think, even more powerful. And so I'm really grateful for that.
It's funny. I think a lot of other people miss this little detail about Italians. A lot of people may or may not disagree with this. they're very forgiving and welcoming in some things. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously Italians love to hold a grudge and, curse you till the day you die or the day they die. But at the same time, something like this, they welcomed you back. You went back multiple times to the point where, it's like you're back in the family. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like from what you're saying, that, this was not about just, a social, organization, or it was about like closing the loop on your family, on who you, like we said before, like on who you actually are.
Absolutely.
Now let's go into the clubs now, because now, was that your first kind of introduction? You said the Columbus Italian Club. Was that your first introduction to realizing, wow, there's these things called Italian clubs, or you'd heard of them before? Or, because I want to get to
So
La
it's
Prossima in a
funny.
second here, but I want to kind of build to that, because there's obviously a reason you started this group.
Yes, so it's actually funny. The neighborhood that I grew up in with my adopted family is right next to the Abruzzi Club, which is one of the major Italian clubs in Columbus. And so it's funny to me, just doing all my research on my genealogy and seeing that my family's from Abruzzo. I immediately was able to kind of connect it with that club. And, I remember as young as I can remember going down to that club. There's a creek down there, and my sister and I would play down there as kids. And so it felt very familiar to me, but definitely through the scholarship, I was able to see that there were more options out there and see the different clubs in Columbus that there were for people of Italian descent.
Okay. So now, did you join any clubs?
I did not.
You just
I,
went,
I
you just went right
attended a
into
few
starting your
events
own?
here and there, but did not join any.
No, I was going to say, you literally just went right into starting your own. You said, nah, you're not. I think we're going to move on here, but let's talk about La Prossima, because
Yeah.
that was, it's funny because most people would have, the one turnoff for a lot of younger people is when they go to a lot of these older clubs. It's exactly what they are. And I'm not, not being disrespectful
Hmm.
to the older generation. I'm somewhere in the middle, but I've been to clubs that are essentially dying out. And that's always been a very tough thing to recruit young people into a club where, let's say you get one or two to join and they go, okay, now what? Was that kind of on your mind? Did you see anything like that? Or did you just kind of had an idea?
It was. And like I mentioned, I had gone to a few events here and there, just kind of scattered. Went to a few of the CIC events, went to some Abruzzi Club events, and I noticed that right off the bat. And to me, it still was a beautiful experience. And I think there's something so special about being around people of the older generation. They have a lot more wisdom. They're able to tell a lot of stories from their time either growing up in Italy or what it was like here growing up as an Italian, as a first generation. And so there's a lot of beauty to that, but I noticed there was such a lack of young people, and it seemed like everyone was kind of looking for this younger generation to join their groups, and it just wasn't happening. And I wasn't sure how they planned on making that happening.
Right. Because you're going to have something. Well, two things are going to have to happen. One, you're going to have a reason for them to want to join, and then you're going to have a reason for them to want to stay. Because like I
Exactly.
said, I've been in a few social groups, not just Italian clubs, other clubs, and they're lucky when they're active with what I'll call middle to older age individuals. But I definitely find it is very difficult to have what I'll call three generations being effective in the same environment. Just my 2 cents. But let's talk about La Prossima. So what started it? You've been around about a year now. So what started it, and tell us about the club.
Yeah. So about a year ago, we decided to start La Prossima. And our idea really came from, like you said, this lack of younger organizations in Columbus. I remember being at the Italian Club, or sorry, not the Italian Club, the Italian Festival here in Columbus, just noticing that there was a lack of these younger clubs. And I was with my friends who are also Italian, and we kind of decided there and then that we were going to start this younger organization and bring something new to Columbus. And we started the organization. The week after, we all got coffee and kind of made the blueprints of how we wanted this to work. And we had this idea of something that was low commitment because we find that people our age don't want to pay an annual membership fee that they don't know if they'll get enough use out of, or feeling like they have to come to certain meetings and things like that. We kind of just had this idea of a fun organization that aimed to celebrate Italian culture in a new, modern way that really ties us as Italian Americans to Italy in this modern age.
Okay. Now, what was the recruitment process?
So we first started reaching out to all of our friends that we knew who were Italian. Then we kind of moved closer to recruiting people from Ohio State. Me and Vincenzo, who also sits on the board with me for La Prossima, we both are fourth-year students at Ohio State. So it was natural that we went that route and, went to some of their Italian club things and told people about what we were doing, and we got some great feedback.
Now, let's talk about this, because a lot of other social clubs started, in a similar way. It was word of mouth. It was like, oh, you're from the same town I'm from. You can join our club. By the way, interesting you noted the dues, because it's always been something where people say, okay, I give you $25, $30 a year. Like, what do I get out of it if I'm going to turn around and every time we have an event, I got to pay $20? It's like, what are the dues for? And we'll get into that in a second. But that's definitely something that sometimes can be a sticking point. But now that you have a club, how do you not fall into the same trap as a lot of these other clubs have fallen into, that at one time were, for the most part, relatively young people that were members, and then they got old, but obviously, like I said, they didn't bring the next generation. I mean, there's a lot of clubs that don't exist anymore. There's a lot of clubs that are basically skeletons of what they were, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I'm not talking about Italian clubs. I'm talking about everything, you could have, whether it's American Legion, VFW, Rotary, Knights of Columbus. Then there's all these different Italian clubs. Like even in here in Pittsburgh, there are different clubs that are either skeletons, don't exist anymore, or, maybe you find one that's somehow chugging along. But, how do you not fall into that trap?
Yeah, so for us, I think we have a different model in that we're constantly thinking of ways to bring in a fresh group of people. And for us, it's the younger organization of, students and young professionals. And so we're constantly reaching out to people at Ohio State. For the most part, our organization is 18 to 30. And so we're constantly reaching out to students, other student organizations, and then we're making sure that we maintain those relationships of people who have been in our organization for a year now, and the professionals that we've connected with who support us, who are, up to that 30 years old type of age range.
Now, do you have I know this is going to sound funny, but do you have an age out point where then, okay, it's time for you to move on to one of the other clubs, or do you, like they could stay in as long as they want?
We do not have an age out as of now. I think people naturally have just kind of joined us through the association of like what age we already serve. And so we haven't had that problem yet. And I think it's something we may face in the near future, but just being a year old, it's not something we've had to really deal with at this point.
Oh, that's good. What are some of the advantages for folks to join you? Putting the network. And by the way, that's one thing I try and drive into, especially younger kids, the importance of networking, and especially when you're networking based on something you have in common. I've said it for a long time. Italians do not do a good job of sticking together. They are too fractured. How do you, what do you tell these younger folks or what I'll call new recruits? Here's why you should join our club, because it's going to help you with this. What is this?
Yeah, so for our organization, like you just hit on, the networking is huge. And for us, you hit the nail on the head of starting with your culture and starting with the people that you already share that common ground with. And for us, we think, you start networking with other Italians, and a lot of them will want to help you out. And we've had networking events, panel discussions, and you have these professionals that are just going around and doing everything they can to make sure that us young people are growing professionally and doing whatever we can to succeed. And so people are grabbing coffee together. People are, meeting up for one-on-one meetings and mentorship, which is really exciting. But then besides the networking and the professional development, I think it's a really fresh experience to get new friends and, really grow in the Italian community. For a lot of our members, they're younger. They might be fourth generation, fifth generation Italians, and they don't really tap into that culture as much. And this is their chance to kind of do so in a younger way that's relevant to them.
Right. No, and again, I think that's the biggest thing is that this culture it's getting diluted, and as a result, people are not seeing the importance of maintaining that cultural tie. There's nothing wrong. I mean, I'm proud to be an American, but at the same time, almost all of us have come, somewhere along our generations have come from somewhere else. We can't just say, well, that's just not important anymore. It's like I always tell people, look, if there were jobs in Italy 100 years ago, most of us wouldn't be here right now. Those people wouldn't have left.
Absolutely.
They didn't. It's not like they said, you know what, things are great here, but I think I'm going to go over there. Nobody does that. So I think a lot of these people don't understand what it took to get here, why they came here, where they came from, and as a result of that, you are, even if you're 2 or 3 generations removed, you are the result of decisions made a while back, and then they brought their kids and they raised them a certain way. Did you? I know you said you were adopted, but have you been able to study Italian at all, learn any of the language?
Yes, I have. So I've done most of it on my own. I did not go through the Italian program at Ohio State. I kind of wish that I would have, just to get a better base. But most of the work that I've done with the Italian language is on my own, whether that be on TikTok, YouTube, just kind of looking through my own resources. But I'm really trying to get better.
Now, and that's important, and I'll tell you why I asked that question. There was a time, when that 80, 90 years ago, probably more like 100 years ago now, when that generation came over, they didn't teach their kids Italian. They wanted to do them assimilate into America. So it was English, it was reading, writing English, speaking English, becoming an American. And the result was essentially some lost what I'll say, cultural knowledge. Not just the fact that they didn't speak Italian, but they lost some of the, in a language, there are certain cultural things that are a part of the language, whether it's, some kind of cliche, whether it's a proverb, whether it's a little thing of wisdom, et cetera, et cetera. Those are lost now to that generation because they didn't learn the language. So the reason I was asking the language was, have you maybe picked up anything? And I'm not talking about just like I know how to say this word in Italian, but have you ever picked up or thought of hey, wow, I picked up some what I'll call wisdom or knowledge because now I know Italian. Has that helped you understand some things better?
I think it does. I mean, I like that you mentioned the Italian proverbs. I think that's something that is very unique to Italian culture. I think every culture has their own proverbs and their own sayings, but I think when you learn the language and you hear some of these proverbs, it makes sense. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the things that my grandparents lived by and, just these classic Italian values.
Right.
And it's been really interesting to learn about.
And I think that they rely, when you're trying to, Americanize your kids, there are some things, especially in that generation, they didn't speak English. If they did, it was broken English. It wasn't that well. And these kids probably learned it, on the street with their friends or in school. And so now the things you might have said in a traditional Italian household in Italy, you're not saying, and you've lost something because of that. And I think people underestimate what the value of what they've lost because of that break and that cultural understanding. There's a lot of Hispanic immigrants come here, and those kids can bounce back and forth between Spanish and English. I think it's wonderful, so they can maintain that hold on their culture where their family comes from, but at the same time they flick a switch and they're in English. But I think we lost that. That's why I think I personally feel like language is very important with respect to, tying back to the culture. What kind of things does your club do to say encourage the members, not just to say, hey, look, I got a T-shirt on, I'm Italian, but what do you encourage them to do to maybe connect more with the culture?
Yeah, so for us, like I mentioned earlier, we really are trying to figure out ways to help young Italian Americans identify and engage in Italian culture as it is today. So for us, we're constantly trying to figure out what do we want to do for events that really add to the authenticity of our organization and the true Italian culture that we promote. Because I think for most of our members, they might experience Italian culture in the way that their parents and their grandparents did. So for them, it looks a lot like maybe Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin in the household, and, spaghetti and meatballs. And for us, we kind of see Italian culture in a different way than I think most people do here in the States.
I agree with that.
So for us, it's really figuring out how we add to that authenticity. And for us, it's kind of seeing Italy as a country that's full of different cultures. I mean, you're Abruzzese, so I think you can understand where I'm coming from, but the Abruzzese culture is very different to what you see up in the north. It's very different to what you see in Sicily. It's just a different culture, and I think a lot of our members don't really understand that, and I think it's the common notion here in the States that Italian culture is a monolith. And so for us, we're constantly trying to find a way for our members to engage with their culture on a deeper level and maybe more specific to the region. So, we've done regional wine tastings, we've done regional dinners and things like that, which have been really fun. And we're looking forward to doing more of that in this coming year.
Regional dancing, by the way, we had, there is a wonderful dance troupe I'll have to introduce you to, but she does a lot of tarantellas from different regions in Italy, and she goes around and actually teaches them. And we'll have to talk about that. Maybe offline I'll do some introductions, but I like that. I also like the idea of, different, the dialects. People in very northern Italy and talking to somebody from in actual Sicilian dialect, they got a newsflash. They may not understand each other. In fact, I can tell you there are people that have said that they won't when they're speaking their traditional, just like in Naples, the Napolitano dialect is, it's not something they speak really outside of that area. And I think it's because a lot of people, to your point, they think it's always been Italy. Italy just became Italy in like the mid 1800s. Those were basically little city states. You had papal states, you had different kingdoms within there. Spanish ran some of it, the French ran some of it for a while. They were conquered, liberated by that. So there was just so much turmoil and turnover after the Roman Empire fell that it wasn't until the mid 1800s when they became finally, reunited to become actually Italy that we know it. And so, when you have a bunch of different, for lack of a better term, countries that form a new country, they don't just say, okay, everybody, we're gonna start eating the same food, we're gonna start speaking the same language, we're gonna start living the same, acting the same. It's gonna be, to your point, it's gonna be just a homogenous society. Like, it doesn't work that way. And you know what the truth is? I'm glad it doesn't work that way, because that's what makes it so special. When you go to the north, when you go to central, when you go to the southern Italy, it's almost like you're in different countries, even though you're in, quote, the same country.
I think Italy is such a diverse country, and like I said, I think the notion in the States is that it's all one culture, but it couldn't be further from the truth. And that diversity is what makes Italian culture so beautiful.
That's right. And it's our job as the Italo-Americani to educate people. One is to get folks with that, that line in their blood to come back and say, listen, you got to get smart on this stuff. There's a reason for that, and understanding where you belong and who you are, and how you came to be, and all the decisions and the things that were made over the how many hundreds of years, and that's why you're here. And I think if people can understand that, maybe they can appreciate the past a little more, maybe care a little more, and then helps really reinforce them personally. Especially the younger people. You see a lot of people that seem to don't know, they seem to be lost. They have no identity. I mean, I don't know if do you see that? I mean, you're on a college campus. Do you see a lot of that?
I see it all the time, and that's why I think we're so lucky to have something like this organization where we can tap back into that culture and find that self-identity, because I think it's all too common. And, you're really right. People seem lost.
Okay. And I think there's almost a diabolical intention to it, because you know what? When I take your past away, I can redefine you into anything I want. But if you have solid roots, if you know who you are and where you came from, nobody can change who you are. Only you can at that point. But I think a lot of these young kids, they need to figure that out and really understand there's a why to this, and it's not just for the heck of it. It really is about you as a person. Now, Andrew, I first off want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedule, but I want to know, where can folks learn more about your organization?
Yeah, so you can find more about La Proxima on our website at laproxima.us, or you can follow us on Instagram at laproxima.org.
All right, and I'm going to put that in the description, so folks go down and take a look in the description below. Click support, find out what's going on, reach out to them, especially if you're in the Columbus area. I encourage you to find these folks, and you know what? I love what you guys are doing. I love to see younger folks step up and say, you know what? We're going to start leading a little bit, because it means that a lot of the folks have been doing this for a long time, and they're kind of waiting for someone to come along and maybe take some of the load off. And I don't think you understand how important that is, especially for people that have been doing, there have been people in some of these clubs for 50, 60 years, and they've probably been the treasurer or the financial guy or the vice president or whatever, and they've been doing it for decades. Like, man, I wish somebody would volunteer, but there's nobody there. So the fact that there's younger folks coming up willing to, get involved, form organizations, make these organizations active. But I'm telling you, write this down. Don't fall into the same trap that a lot of these organizations fell into. When they first started, they were vibrant, they were growing, they were awesome, they were active. It was never a dull moment, but they didn't prepare for the inevitable future. So I would just tell you, take that lesson to heart, especially as you go around a lot of these older organizations. And I would also encourage you to, co-participate in their events, encourage your younger folks. And I'll tell you one thing, Andrew, I would say this, I just got done filming a documentary, and there were some people that I would have loved to have had in the documentary, but they have since passed on. And so I never got the chance to ask questions, follow-up questions. Make sure that, you tell people, listen, ask these older folks questions. Talk to them about their parents and their grandparents, because when they're gone, and that knowledge goes with them. So, I hope you guys really reach out to these older folks, and really pick their brains. One, they appreciate it. But two, you may not appreciate what you're being taught now. But I promise you, Andrew, 10, 20, 30 years, you'd be like, thank God I had that conversation, because now I know the answer to these questions. So just take that for what it's worth. All right, Andrew, listen, I want to thank you for taking some time out. And, I do wish you guys the best of luck. And, we're going to stay in touch, because I'm going to do some introductions for some folks for you to get you involved. And again, keep these folks getting smart on Italian culture. There's so much to learn. You won't learn it in a lifetime. So I'm going to encourage you to keep learning, and keep encouraging your members to learn. And, for all my listeners, as always, I want to thank you for tuning in. I am going to take a quick break just to pay the bills before I come back and say goodbye. Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074.
Thank you so much, Steve, for giving us this opportunity and platform to share what we do. So big thanks, and thank you to everyone who's listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Again, folks, thank you all very much, and I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week. Take care.